Welcome back. I want to record this again like I did before. And today I want to focus on troubleshooting. Troubleshooting means to find out what's wrong with something. Try to determine the trouble and to hopefully cure it. So troubleshooting is a general term, can apply to all kinds of things. A doctor is somebody who troubleshoots people's problems, patients, medical problems, tries to find a solution based on the symptoms. Or an auto mechanic troubleshoots cars based on the symptoms and instruments, similar to a computer repairman who troubleshoots things. So there we go. So that's what we're going to be talking about, troubleshooting. These are generalities. When I talk about troubleshooting here, there are some general techniques that you can use for troubleshooting that do not maybe focus in on any particular trouble, but just in general, what we mean by troubleshooting. So applying the techniques of a doctor to a machine. So troubleshooting is something that you get better at with time. But you have to start somewhere. So when you start with something new that you don't understand fully, there are some basic techniques you can use to gather information to help you zero in on the problem. The difference might be that somebody who's been doing it longer might have more experience and builds up kind of an intuition, which is where your previous experiences guide you in a way that you may not even understand. And that does come with time. But don't be discouraged when you first start out that you don't understand everything about how a computer functions or how the operating system functions. They are very complicated, and yet in many ways the different parts that are fairly easy to understand, the major parts. So that's one of the reasons why I asked you to take some time and identify some of the parts of a computer that you have available to you, such as the one in our locker or one you may have at home, so that you can understand the function of the different parts, what they do. I'll be able to identify and describe what they do in relation to other parts. So how do you go about troubleshooting something? Well, these are the 5 basic steps in a nutshell. Determine the major area at fault. In other words, what is it? What is the problem? You have to have some idea of the problem. Sometimes people will simply say it's broken. Well, number 2, determine what action occurred just prior to a failure or a problem. What happened recently? Has there been a change? Number 3, write down settings before you change them. 4, especially at first, it's best to take your time, work slowly. You don't want to make things worse. And of course, you might need to do a lot of thinking, which includes research, investigation, maybe doing a lot of searches on the internet. Focusing in on each of these, first one is to determine the major fault. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes people will just say, oh, my computer's broken. Well, that's just a bit too general. That's like going to the doctor and saying, I'm sick. The doctor will then further ask, well, how so? How are you sick? What are your symptoms? So it is with a computer. You need to ask the patient or the user of the computer, the patient being the computer, ask them what is the problem that you're experiencing. And those problems fall into three major categories. They're either hardware problems, that would be the electronics and the mechanical parts of the computer, or it's software, which is including the operating system and all of the programs that run in the operating system, or it's user generated problems. Maybe the person is not understanding what they're doing with the computer, or understanding how to use it for what they're trying to use it for. And of these three, actually, the most common is where the user is the problem, actually. Although, so that's why this, being a computer professional, personal computer or PC professional, or IT technician, whatever you want to call them, often involves a lot of interaction with people. And so last week we focused on professionalism, and that's a big part of it, because a lot of your a lot of times you are dealing with people, and maybe acting as a trainer or somebody who's tutoring them in how to use something properly, and to do that in a graceful and polite manner. So that's pretty important aspect of all this. Now, troubleshooting, often you need to ask the question, what happened last? Right? Did something change? Did you add something to the computer? Maybe install something in the computer or on the computer? Was there new software installed? Did you maybe download something and install it? Were there any settings changed on the computer? The operating system has a lot of settings in the control panel and elsewhere, where you can make changes, and those changes can change the behavior of the computer, or even disable the operating system. There's really nothing that'll damage the hardware, but you can make changes to the settings and disable the computer, in effect, through the settings to the operating system. And then a big one that happens all too often is malicious software. Did somebody download an email with an attachment and maybe run the attachment by mistake, or on purpose, or download something from the internet, or get a program from somebody of unknown origin? So sometimes that can involve installing malicious software, meaning a program that does something to the computer or to the operating system. A virus, in other words, or malware, as it's often called. And it goes by different names, but some kind of a program that is harmful to your computer. So those are all things to consider when you ask that question, when you ask the user or ask yourself about the history of the computer and what happened just previous to the problem. Another important aspect of troubleshooting is to keep track of anything that you change. If you make changes to your computer in any way, you want to make a record of it, write it down, or keep track of it. Why? Because you make changes and you might make the problem worse. It's very easy to get in there and say, oh, I'm going to fix this and fix that and make this. Oh, while I'm at it, let me try changing this. And before long, you've buried yourself in more problems. So you want to be able to back up if you need to go back to a previous condition if what you tried didn't work. So kind of like an undo, right? But the operating system doesn't always have an undo for everything you do, and neither does the hardware. You have to remember what you did so you can restore it back to its original condition. Don't depend on your memory, so that's why I say write it down. And that's because you want to return the settings to the way you found them. work slowly. And when you're doing troubleshooting, trying to figure out what's wrong with a computer or software or a network or maybe something the user is doing, it takes time sometimes to do that. Might not be a good idea to try to rush things and just get yourself frustrated or the user frustrated. To proceed in a methodical way. You want to do it in a way that's not stressful to yourself. And sometimes things happen when a computer is sorely needed. You know, somebody's doing something and they have a deadline, or that can make a lot of pressure on you as a technician. Somebody that's helping somebody with a computer, then you might say, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to get this done quickly. But often that just becomes counterproductive, and you end up spending even more time than if you had given yourself a little bit of less stress by taking things slower. Now, that last aspect of troubleshooting is the thinking part, but it's very important, of course, and that is to consider what you know. And one of the things you can do is to eliminate what you know is not a problem. A lot of times a computer system will function partially. There'll be a lot of things that are working. And based on those things that you know that are working, you can eliminate a lot of possibilities. Just like in an automobile or in a human being or an animal the veterinarian's trying to help. There are a lot of things that the veterinarian or the doctor or the auto mechanic or the computer technician can eliminate as possible problems just by knowing that, by observing that certain things do work. Of course, another big part of the thinking process is to then look for possible theories as to what the problem is, possible problems. So based on what you know is not the problem, you might be able to come up with what could be the problem. Another very useful thing is to look for other people who have the same problem. There's a good chance that somebody else has had a similar problem. A lot of times you get some kinds of indications of messages of some kind. The computer will give you messages sometimes on the screen, or it may give you sounds that you can use, beep codes they call them, where you can go to a website of a manufacturer or to the website of a software company program information, and they will tell you about the symptoms that you're observing. Maybe there's already been somebody who's experienced that same problem. Good chance of it. It's definitely a good thing to do, to search for other people. In fact, that's a very common way to solve problems, is you find that, yeah, somebody else had this exact same symptom, this same error, or this same problem. They went ahead and they solved it, and you can do the same. And that's part of consulting fellow technicians too. Maybe if you have other people around you that you know that have had experience in this area, they can be quite helpful. Now let me ask you, what are the 3 major fault areas that you find problems with the computer? What do all those problems fall into?
Software.
Yeah, software is one.
Hardware and
Hardware and user-generated
user-generated problems.
problems, right. 3 different areas. What are some resources you can check to troubleshoot a problem you've never encountered before? What would be some place to look for information?
Google, the manufacturer.
Yeah, right. The manufacturer probably does have a troubleshooting website or some documentation on common problems with the equipment if it's hardware related, or if it's software. The company that sells the software will have some type of a forum or place where you can find postings of people that have experienced different problems, and you may find that that same problem has been experienced before. So yes, definitely. That is probably one of your biggest resources nowadays, is the internet. Not so many things come with manuals anymore, do they? When you get something, a computer, it doesn't have much information with it usually. Maybe just basic stuff about getting it started and running, and that's about it. Well, how about let's now look at some common problems that computers experience. Some common problems. Here's a list of a few of them. There are many more, but I'm just going to go through these one at a time. A blue screen error. This is an error when a computer crashes. The operating system creates this error. It will put up a screen notifying you. This is a very common type of error that occurs when there's a bad crash, when there's something that goes really bad wrong with either a program running or with the operating system itself. And so it'll put up a message and the computer will halt, stop functioning at that point. It doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily wrong with the hardware when you get this kind of an error, but rather that a program, either one of the parts of the operating system consists of many programs working together to do different jobs. They're called processes and services. And sometimes something goes wrong with one of those. And that can create this type of error. The other thing is applications software. If one of those programs or parts of the operating system causes a violation of memory boundaries, it can create an error like this. Yes, sir.
My brother actually, he broke his USB port, and so he created a short, so he gave him a blue screen. And it took me a while to actually find out what was wrong with it, because I was actually not putting this blue screen. So I checked this course. He actually somehow plugged it in the wrong way, and it kind of like created a short. So I just unplugged the SATA from it, and it worked.
So he had the power connections or something, or the signal connections damaged inside the connector, and it created one of these errors. Oh. So hardware can do that as well. Interesting. Probably the operating system was reacting to that. Couldn't deal with it. So, okay, I give up, and it puts up this. So this is like the operating system panicking, or the computer is panicking when this happens. It's something serious. You can't deal with it. There's no way to recover. This would be a serious error. Not that it's necessarily hardware that's damaged, but something is seriously wrong, probably with some program running. The operating system consists of many, many different programs running at the same time. And if one of those can violate its, there are boundaries. If you on your computer, in Windows at least, if you type Control-Shift-Escape, it will bring up a thing called show you here. Oh, there it is. It's called the Task Manager, and the Task Manager lists lots of different processes or services. The services are usually part of the operating system. They are programs that the operating system runs. And most of these are running all the time or doing things at different times, not always at the same. But they all take some amount of memory. So they're sitting in the computer's memory somewhere, and therefore they have to have boundaries as to how much memory they can use. Sometimes a program will try to step out of its boundaries. That can cause errors. Processes are also, some of these are programs that you install. Like, well, there you can see I'm running a browser, and Firefox is there. Lots of different processes. There's one for, oh, that's a screenshot. I was using that a while ago. Still running. And then over here is applications. Applications are the visible programs, the ones you can see that are running on the screen. So when I did that, that caused it to, there we go. So that's one thing. If you get this kind of a message, then you're going to get some kind of message there, and you can look that up. You can try to find out if somebody else has experienced that similar type of message. A lot of times it won't be a message that will help you, because if it's a memory boundary type problem, it'll just simply tell you where it violated the memory, and that may be unique to your particular computer that you're dealing with. But it's worth at least it's worth a try to search the, especially since it's Windows, it's going to be, might be something you'll find in the support website for Microsoft, for example. Another type of problem that occurs is startup problems. Startup problems are problems that occur when your computer just begins running. You just turn it on and it starts to boot up, and then you see things go wrong right away. Startup problems are very common. A lot of things do go wrong when the computer first starts up. Maybe the computer just simply does nothing at all. It's dead. Or maybe the power light is on but nothing happens. Or you hear some beeps. Or you hear some kind of error, you see some kind of error display on the screen. Or maybe the hard drive or the storage system doesn't seem to work, it doesn't access it. Or maybe after a short time the computer crashes, maybe puts up a blue screen, or maybe it just reboots. So what could cause these? Well, if the computer is completely dead, nothing happens, there's a good place to start is with the power, because of course the computer needs power to do anything, and you want to make sure it's plugged into a good power source, make sure it's getting electricity at the power supply. But then if you know there's electricity getting into the power supply from the AC side, from the wall outlet, then the power supply is the next thing you want to check if you have a computer that does nothing at all. We're going to have another topic later on in the class about specifically power supplies, but and how to test them and what are some of their characteristics. But they're pretty easy to test. And you can, if you don't have a tester, the other option is to try a different power supply if you have another one. So that's definitely one possibility when you have a totally dead computer. Because usually, if you have a working power supply, you're going to see at least some lights, some fans turning, the hard drive will be spinning, something's going to be going on in there. And so if you see nothing at all, no sound, no lights, no fans, that's a pretty good indication it might be something to do with power. What if you see that some lights light up, but there's no activity? Okay, so you maybe get some lights on the computer and it looks like things maybe are running, maybe some fans are running, that sort of thing. Well, it's possible that the power supply is working fine, but maybe there's a connection problem from the power supply to the motherboard. Motherboard is the big part of your computer that connects to everything else. And there's a big connector that goes to it. It has to be properly attached. Some motherboards have more than one connection. In fact, I know this one does. It has two connections where you have to connect the power properly. So if you didn't have it connected properly, the power supply would still be running. You might get some lights on from the computer. The hard drives might turn and then you'll hear sound, you'll hear fans, but still the computer seems to be not doing anything. Another thing is, when a computer is doing anything at all, if it puts anything on the screen, if it even just beeps, it takes the CPU to do that. So the CPU, the processor, has to be functioning to do anything like that. If there's no processing going on, if the processor is located, a big part in your motherboard here, if that is not doing its job, the computer will do nothing other than lights and sound and fans. It'll make some fan sounds, and you might hear the hard drive turning, but it's not going to beep and it's not going to put anything on the screen without the CPU. So if the CPU is not functioning for some reason, one fairly common thing that can happen is the computer's CPU. It has many little connections on the bottom of it. A couple hundred different connections on there or more. Every one of those little connections has to be making contact with a pin, a little wire that pokes up from a socket. So there's a socket on the motherboard, and that socket has to make contact. If it's not making contact with all those pins, I can take that lever here, open it up, and you can see in there. Let's see if I put this on the other. So you can see all those pins, all those dots, those silver dots. That is what connects the CPU on the bottom of your CPU, which is, it's got those gold colored dots. They all have to make contact with those silver dots. That's called a pin grid array. So every one of those has to be connected if one of them is not. So what that means then is if somehow the CPU isn't properly placed into the socket, that can cause the CPU not to work. The socket, the CPU has to be put into the CPU has to be put in the socket the right way as well. There's only one way you can actually put it in. There's notches on it so that you can't put it in there. But just want to make sure that it's pushed, that it falls in into its socket and doesn't slide around at all. Because if it slides around, then you know that it's not making contact with all those pins. It should be firmly in there, and it should be. And then, of course, you have the lid you have to close. There's a little arm on the side. Right, that arm you have to, whoo, that's neat. That arm, you have to go like that, right, and that holds it down. That holds the CPU. After the CPU is in the proper location. If it's, you can try to force it if it's not in the right. If the CPU isn't properly seated, you can still put that thing down and mash on it. You know, push down on it real hard, and force it, but that's not good because the CPU won't be making good contact then. We don't want to do that. The other possibility is that just simply maybe a defective motherboard. Motherboards can go bad, and everything depends on the motherboard. The CPU might be okay, but there's other parts of the motherboard that can fail. Yeah.
Another problem that came across is that, for example, if you have a USB flash drive attached to it, when you turn on your device, it will actually try to boot from the stick first before it goes into your things. It will not boot. So there's like some problems that came across.
That's true. If your computer's BIOS settings are set up to try to boot off the USB, and you have a USB thing in there, a USB device, it may try to load that, and it can't. So then it gives up. That sometimes is the case. That's a matter of settings. So yeah, that's another possibility. It might act like it's failed, but it's not. Or we experienced that yesterday. A computer was not booting up properly, and it turned out it was trying to boot from this DVD drive, because the DVD had a DVD in there, and the DVD wasn't it was an operating system DVD, but it was all scratched up and it wouldn't load. Another possibility is that maybe the computer starts up, you hear sounds, it appears to be doing something with the hard drive, but you see nothing on the screen, no video. Yeah. What'll happen is if the BIOS, basic input output system, that's built into the motherboard, detects that it's not able to access the video system for some reason. The way video works, and this is true of both on a motherboard type video, a lot of motherboards, most motherboards in fact, usually come with built-in video capability, right? You can connect your monitor directly to the motherboard. You don't need a video card necessarily to use your computer. But a lot of times people will install a video card because the motherboard's basic video capability is maybe not what they want. It's not as powerful as a video card would be. So they put a video card in there. But if the BIOS system, when the computer first starts up, the self-test, the power on self-test, or POST, can't find the video, can't talk to the video properly, it will beep. And these beeps are codes. Sometimes it'll make short and long beeps, kind of like Morse code. You know, beep, 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 beep. Except they're slow beeps. It does it real slow so that you can hear it. And then that will be maybe one beep, and then maybe two beeps, and then three beeps or something. You know, you never know what the code will be. And that will then represent some kind of error problem. And then it'll do that if it knows the video is not working. If the video is working, it'll put the message on the screen. But it can't. But if it can't put the message on the screen, then the beeping is how it does it. So there's a little tiny speaker, a tiny beeper on the motherboard to do that. And you can then look up that beep code on the website or the documentation for your motherboard and find out what it means. It has to do with the motherboard, so that's where you would find it. It's like if you have a motherboard by a certain manufacturer, you would want to look at their documentation rather than necessarily the computer case manufacturer or something like that. So like for Dell, we have a Dell computer here. You would go to the Dell website and you type in the model number of the motherboard or the computer system that has the motherboard in it, and you would get the beep codes. A common problem with video is simply that, of course, there's no monitor plugged in, right? That could be Monitor's not plugged in or properly plugged in. Another one is the video card might be loose. It has to sit in its socket, and it could be loose. Sometimes video cards fail. A lot of video cards nowadays are powerful computers unto themselves, and they're as complicated as a motherboard. They have huge processors on them that have billions of transistors. Just a single transistor failing out of those billions of transistors that some of the, more powerful video cards have, it only takes one to cause the thing to quit working properly. Which is amazing to consider that they work at all when you think about that there's so many parts that have to work right for the thing to function. So sometimes the video card just needs to be replaced, which is, can be expensive. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. So that's where, again, that beep code can become helpful to us. If the monitor could be bad too. Maybe you look and see, hey, cables are working fine. Cables are connected properly and to the right connections. We experienced a problem when some of us started loading our computer that's in our locker, and we weren't getting any video. Well, we just simply had it plugged into the wrong place because there was actually a video connection on the motherboard, plus some of the computers had a video card installed on it. So, but maybe the monitor has a problem, or maybe it's not compatible with the video output of your computer. So that's a possibility. What other kinds of problems might we run into? Another problem is with setup. You're going to try some experiments today in our lab, and we'll look at some things that you can change in the setup. What do I mean by the setup? The computer has, the motherboard has a built-in basic input-output system. We refer to it as the BIOS. It's kind of like a built-in operating system, and it's called the basic input-output system because it connects the hardware to the operating system. And it also does a power on self-test, and it runs the motherboard. And it's possible that there are some settings for that BIOS, and they refer to those settings as the CMOS. And the reason they call it the CMOS is because on some motherboards, the settings are stored in a type of memory called CMOS memory. CMOS stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor. It's a kind of memory that as long as there's a little battery connected to it, it won't forget what's put in it. It's non-volatile memory. And years ago, not so much anymore, years ago, if you had a battery that went, there's usually a battery on most motherboards. If the battery died, then it would lose its settings and the computer would have problems then starting up. Nowadays, though, they don't use CMOS memory so much anymore for flash settings. I'm sorry, for BIOS settings. They use flash memory. Flash memory is also non-volatile memory. It doesn't forget, but it doesn't need a battery. So the kind of memory that's used in USB flash drives or solid-state SSD drives instead of mechanical ones. If those settings are set wrong, that can disable the computer. You can go into your CMOS settings, which you can get into when you first start up your computer. You press a certain key on your keyboard, like in the case of our Dell computers here, we have F2. But it could be the escape key or the delete key or some other F function key. Those are common keys for that purpose. And then you can go in and you can make changes to those settings. You could completely disable everything on your computer and make it non-functional if you went in there and did that, if you didn't know what you're doing or wanted to disable things. That's why by the way, there's a password on your settings for the CMOS settings, or I keep calling it CMOS because that's what people still call it, but it's the settings for BIOS settings. So there's a little jumper on your motherboard, and you have to locate it where it is on the motherboard. Every motherboard's different. But if you, it's called the password jumper, and it'll be identified. You can get a magnifying glass sometimes to see it, but it'll say something like PWD on it or something. And you pull that jumper off, and you can then turn off the motherboard, turn off the computer before you do that though. Turn off the computer, pull the jumper out, turn it on, and then it'll put a message on the screen that the password has been cleared. And the reason why there's a password on the BIOS is because you can do really bad things to your computer going into the BIOS. Not that you probably damage anything, but you can certainly disable it. So that's why sometimes they, people will put passwords on a computer, that, especially computers that are used by the public. Now, the ones in your locker, they might have passwords on them. So if you run into that when you're doing this lab today, you'll want to do that. You want to clear it. So look for the jumper on the Dell motherboard is a green jumper. Let's see if I can just real quick show you a picture of a. Since I don't have it. There we go. So you just there we go. There's the one there. See, the fellow's pulling it out on this motherboard. That one happens to be blue, so it's different motherboard. I just know the one on the Dell is green. So you'd be looking for that that little jumper right there. You pull it out. There may be other jumpers on your motherboard too, so you need to identify the right one to clear that. All right, what else? So that would be a BIOS problem that causes that kind of error. And that's a fairly common thing. What if your computer simply crashes or reboots all of a sudden? These kinds of things are called intermittent problems. So you turn on your computer and it runs for a while. Seems like everything's okay, everything looks okay, programs run, the operating system seems to be normal, and then all of a sudden it crashes. Oh no! Those are some of the more frustrating problems that happen with computers when that happens. They can come at any time. You can't always predict them. Startup problems are actually the kinds I like. I like when problems happen when you first start up your computer. And by the way, fortunately, most problems can be seen when you first start up your computer. I'd say 80% of them are like that. But then there are these other kinds of problems that happen, after a while, after the computer's been running for a while. It could be that the computer is not getting enough power for when it's running. It might be that maybe recently somebody added, this is a very common thing. Somebody adds a new video card to their computer, a new high-power video card, and it takes a lot of power to run that new video card. It takes as much power maybe to run that video card as it does the whole rest of the computer, because it's got a really powerful processor on it called the graphics processing unit, GPU. So it uses lots of power, and the poor power supply can't handle it. So the power supply maybe can run it for a little while, and then the power supply just gets so hot and it gives up, and then wow, the computer crashes. So that's a pretty common thing. Another common thing that can cause an intermittent is something getting hot. This is actually surprisingly common. Just getting hot. It's really important that the CPU of a computer and the GPU and the video card and the memory and other critical parts of the computer are running within their temperature tolerance. They can get so hot that they'll burn you if you touch them, that they'll boil water if you put a little water on it. And that's not good when they're getting that hot. You know, we're not trying to boil water with our computer. So what can cause that? Why do computers get hot? Well, the reason why they can get hot is because usually it's because they're simply not getting cooled properly. A really common cause of that is dust. So if you open up a computer and it looks like that, that's not good for the computer at all. The poor parts can't keep cool enough. And you know, if a computer runs a lot, and it's in a place with a lot of dust, they will get looking like that after a while. Fortunately, it's an easy thing to cure. Just get some kind of blower and blow it out. A vacuum cleaner or cans of air. They sell cans of air at the computer places like Best Buy and places like that. Or I've taken shop vac. Shop vac works great. Just blow it out. You know, blow it out. I'll take it outside and blow it out. What was that?
Get a compressor.
A compressor? Yeah, a compressor.
Air cans, they're pretty. It's like $5 each, right?
Yeah, they're expensive.
You can't clean it thoroughly with just one can too.
That's true. That's not the most economical, right? A compressor like you use to fill up your tires on your car or bicycle, those are great. Except just want to be careful not to blow too hard. You can blow things apart. They have a lot of pressure, don't they? You know, you could get in there close and knock something loose if you're not careful. So, you know, use that. But a vacuum cleaner, like a shop vac, works pretty good too. I've even used my leaf blower. Just don't get in there. You know, leaf blowers are pretty powerful, so you can knock things loose too. But they work great for cleaning a computer out in a hurry. So the reason why, of course, that this happens is that when you have lots of dust, it's like a blanket over it. It's like putting insulation over everything, and it makes it build up heat. And then the fans, they can't turn very well. They're so choked up with dust that it won't turn anymore. That can be a situation too. By the way, if somebody smokes around their computer, smoking coats everything with a sticky layer, and that makes the dust stick even worse. A lot of times you see computers look like that, it's because the person using it smokes. Oh, another reason not to smoke. It's not good for your computer, and imagine if it does that to your computer, what it does to your lungs. Right? Sermon for the day. All right. So yeah, well, that is some common troubleshooting techniques there, and nothing really very difficult about any of these things, but oh yeah, another one. Mechanical hard drive failures. Sometimes the hard drives will fail. If they're mechanical ones, they have moving parts, and sometimes they just wear out. They have a certain life expectancy because they spin at a very high speed, and they have two moving parts. They have a spinning disc, and they have an arm that moves around. You can see that in the picture there. Both of those parts, something can go wrong with those. So you will hear a hard drive will fail. It'll make strange noises. Not the way it usually sounds. Clicking sounds or grinding sounds is a good sign that is a bad sign that there's something wrong with your hard drive. And so it may be still working for a while, even making funny noises, but it's a pretty sure thing that it's going to fail soon. Speaking of hard drives, there's something on a hard drive called the master boot record, the MBR. The master boot record stores some really important information that is required to get your computer up and running and started. If the master boot record is damaged, it won't be able to boot up. Viruses love to attack the master boot record. If you have a malicious program, one of the things that they do is they will attack the master boot record. Sometimes they will actually put themselves into the master boot record. And what happens is they insert themselves into it. I'm talking about the virus. What they can do then is when you start up your computer, they will take control of your computer. They still may allow the operating system to load up after the virus loads, or but it'll be like it's the master of your computer. It'll take over control to the point where you can't control it anymore. So that's a particularly So a lot of times, master boot record is something that is people back them up. A lot of times your computer will come, if you get a new hard drive, they'll come with software for backup, or it'll come with the operating system will do this. It'll make a copy of the master boot record. I know later models of Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows 8, they do this. They will make copies of that, and they'll let you know if there's a problem. Another thing is a lot of BIOS, basic input-output systems on motherboards, check the master boot record. They keep a record of it, and they will. There's a new kind of BIOS that's been out now for a while called EUFI. It's extensible. What does it stand for? Anyway, it's the newer type of BIOS, and it's one of the things that it does is it tries to protect the master boot record from attack, because it's a very vulnerable part of the computer. It's kind of like a, if something gets control of that, then everything else is futile, because you'll have to. It doesn't say that you can't fix the problem. And if you have this problem, then it might be that you just have to reload the computer, reinstall it, or you can restore the master boot record and fix it. There is a program. There's a number of programs you can get, the software. There's one that comes with Windows called FDisk, that stands for fixed disk. And one of the things it can do is fix the master boot record if it happens to be failing. And lastly, a lot of problems occur after you do something new to the computer as far as adding new equipment to it. If you add new hardware, then sometimes things don't work right. Not like you damaged anything or anything, but it will cause problems. And the operating system may not know how to use the hardware, because or maybe in the process of installing the hardware, you disconnected something else, like a fan or a data cable or something. Or maybe the hardware that's added to the computer just isn't compatible. See, I've got a motherboard here that has a certain kind of expansion slots on it. So if I want to add some new hardware that uses the expansion slots, I've got to make sure that it is compatible with those expansion slots. And there's quite a number of different types of expansion slots. When we get into the more detail on the motherboard later in the class, we'll talk about the many different kinds of expansion slots that there are. And you have to make sure that you're compatible with those. So always, if there's been a change like that, that can be a time of problems. Now, I was going to show you something. If you want to check on hardware and see if everything's working in your computer, if Windows at least starts up, this only works if it starts up, but maybe the new hardware you put in just doesn't work like you think it should, or it doesn't work at all, then you can go to a thing called the Device Manager. Now, I just started the Device Manager up. And you can get to that from the control panel, which you click on the Start button. You can't see my Start button on there, but actually you can. Let me show you it. Guess you can. Oops. Get to my screen. Yeah, now you can see it. Okay, so Start button. this off the screen here for a second. Nope. I'm trying to get the Google Hangouts to show the right screen here. There we go. Right. Start button down there on the bottom. So I click my start button and I can go to the control panel is one way to do it, but you can right click on where it says computer and go to properties. And then when you do that, this pops up. And let me get that out of the way. This is called this is what pops up when you right click on your computer. You can also do it here on the if you have it on the desktop. You know what? I just realized you guys can't see what I'm showing on the other. Sorry about that. Let me do that again. Okay, so you can get to it by clicking on the start button and right-clicking on my computer, and then properties. And that brings up the control panel. So let me bring the control panel over to the right screen here. Wow. That does a neat effect, doesn't it? Let's see, how do I get him out of here? There we go. Okay, so here's what pops up when you right-click on your on my computer, whether it be on the Start menu or on your desktop. You get Device Manager, and this is what Device Manager looks like. And it just lists all the devices in your computer. And it'll list them, the major categories of devices, I should say. Each one of these is a category, so sometimes there might be more than one thing there. It's under each category. If there's something wrong in one of these categories, like on this computer, there's something plugged into this computer right now that is noticed by the operating system, but it doesn't know what it is. So it says unknown device. Now, I'm not sure what that is, but something's plugged into it that's causing that. Whatever that device is, if I wanted to use it right now, I wouldn't be able to because the operating system doesn't know what it is. It doesn't, and specifically, it doesn't have a driver program. A driver program is a program that allows the operating system to use a particular piece of hardware. So that's a good place to look if you're having it. If you have a piece of equipment that's not working, is you look in the Device Manager and see if the operating system recognizes the device. If it doesn't recognize it, it's not going to be able to use it. So that's a good one to check out, the Device Manager. So that's a little different thing than I showed you a bit ago. We have the Device Manager, and then the other thing I showed you was if you have a piece of software that's not working, there's the you can click or type on your keyboard Control caps escape. No, Control Shift escape. Excuse me, Control Shift escape, or you can get to it by typing Control Alt Delete. That's another way. That's called the Task Manager, and this has to do with the different software and operating system components. So you can kind of think of these as complementary things here. You have the Device Manager for your hardware, and you have the Task Manager for your software. And if there's a problem with one of your software applications or one of the processes that is running the operating system or the services here, it will tell you about that. It will have messages there. Now, a lot of times, different processes or services will be stopped. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. They're just sitting there waiting to be used. They're not necessarily doing anything right now. So that's not necessarily bad. Our applications here, I have right now, the applications are the programs that you can see on your screen. the ones that are running, doing something. So, you know, it says those are all running. I'm running a slideshow, I'm running a browser, I'm running the Paint program, and the device manager. Those are all applications. But this can be a useful thing. Now, what's particularly useful is you can look at performance, and you can see, well, for example, the CPU here. This bar is telling me how much power the processor is how much processing power is being used. If that bar goes all the way to the top, that tells you the processor is very busy. And that would be something that probably would cause your computer to run slow. So somebody might say, oh, my computer's running really slow. Well, you can go to the task manager and look in and see what the CPU is doing. And if you have multiple CPUs, you can look at the different CPU cores. If you've got more than one, and look at them, and maybe one of those is very busy. The other thing you can look at is your memory here to see how much memory is being used. So right now, it's saying I'm only using less than half the memory, so memory's okay. But if your memory fills up, if you just run lots of programs, one after the other, maybe browsers are particularly good at this, and you have lots of pages open on your browser, tabs, or windows, you can fill up your memory with that, and it'll just run out of memory. And then when that happens, the operating system actually, is smart enough to say, okay, I'm out of memory, so now I'm going to start using the hard drive like it's memory. So it starts putting stuff from the memory temporarily on the hard drive. And that's called the memory swap space. It'll do that if it runs out of memory, but then it gets really slow because it takes a lot longer to get stuff off the hard drive than it does out of the memory. When I say memory, I'm meaning the memory on the motherboard itself. That kind of memory. All right, well, just some ideas there for some general troubleshooting. As we go through the different parts of the computer in greater detail, you'll see some things that will help you with troubleshooting more specifically specific types of hardware. So now, why don't we take a break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and I want to show you a couple other things, a couple videos with about how Windows works that will be helpful to you. Some of the things that Windows does that can help us with troubleshooting. So I'm going to stop the broadcast here, or the recording as well.